Sound speeds, and welcome to the Speed Bumps Podcast, episode 4. I tell you, it's getting very interesting for me recording on the DJI Pocket 2 because it has 3 gimbal action, so it's able to go up and down, left and right, and stabilize itself on all those different axes while I'm driving. And that comes in handy if you're walking, you're trying to take the bumps out of your hands. But what it does not come in handy at all for is when you're driving, because it's trying to stabilize every single turn I do. If I tilt lock it, it's going to cut my my head off as I go up and down. I think that's the setting I'm trying in this week's episode, because I tell you, FPV and the follow modes, they're fluctuating too much when I get into post. So anyway, we're going to try this episode and see what happens. It's not dark yet, so I don't have a reason to really try my darkness camera just yet. I've luckily been on a bunch of days lately, so driving home from work and recording a podcast, hey, tell you, it's going to be daylight, and so I appreciate getting home, having a chance to see my family and whatever. But regardless, I've received a lot of questions regarding today's topic that I'm going to be discussing. EMC cables, have I botched the job? Here's what I see when I test all the cables at hand. Testing with the multimeter shows 0 issues. Pins 1, 2, 3 go to the corresponding pins on the other side and nowhere else. Do numbers jumping all over the place indicate I failed soldering it correctly? Then why, if I connect the cable, then turn on the tester, it shows passed? Why does it show ground only on the female connector? I watched your video showing making cables in real time 3 times before starting the assembly, and I followed Neutrich's manual to the letter, except where I used electrical tape to further isolate pins 2 and 3, same as you did. Yes, the drain is properly connected to the jacket on the cable I showed first. I made the cable myself. So let's talk about EMC connectors, because there's a lot of confusion about them. Most of the time people just consider a normal XLR connector, especially a female, and they say, well, it doesn't work like it. Well, no, it's not, because it's an RF shielding, strongly grounded, heavy-duty connector. That's the nature of an EMC connector. So a normal XLR female connector that you slide in will perhaps not even touch. Once the pins line up on the inside, it may not even touch the outer shell on the inside of the microphone. And if it doesn't do that, then it can't properly ground, or it might make just the tiniest little connection, maybe even on one little part, or maybe the whole thing. But if it doesn't make a good solid connection on the inside of the microphone all the way around, then it's not going to be properly grounded. And that's one of the things that an EMC assures, is that there is going to be proper grounding. Now, if you don't know why that is, you can always check out my video review that I did on the EMC connectors a long time ago, like near the beginning of the channel. I love these things, and I've been using them for years. Now, the reason why they are a little bit different is because there's metal sticking up on the actual connector themselves. It has a little rubber boot, and then it has underneath that these little the little metal pieces that stick up. And what those do is those press up against the inside of the microphone. So they're kind of, imagine like a little bit of a ridge like this. If you start to stick it into a microphone, it's going to have to press the metal down in order for it to make a good constant connection on the inside of the microphone shell casing. And if it doesn't do that, then it's not properly grounded. Now, some people complain and they say it doesn't fit, this connector is too tight. It's not really. The nature of an EMC is, whoa dude, where are you going? The nature of an EMC connector is that what you do is you have to sometimes press it a little bit. Not all shells on XLRs are the same. Some of them will be looser and you'll have no problem sticking an EMC connector in. And those are the ones you definitely want to make sure are properly grounded. And they probably weren't getting a proper casing ground on any of the other cables that you connected up to it if it's too loose. Now, an EMC connector will actually press against the insides of those walls, and if it's a tight connector, then what it'll do is it'll press those pieces of metal down. So it does take some elbow grease, but it's all normal. It's all part of breaking an EMC connector. I know it sounds weird, and you would just expect it to work out of the gate. Now, if you happen to buy one of my cables, the reason why I don't go ahead and break it in by plugging it a few times into a tight microphone in order to knock those pieces of metal down, the reason I don't do that is because if you connect it up to a microphone that's loose, I don't want to make that adjustment for you in the break-in period, because then it may not properly ground all the way around on the inside of the connector. I don't want to do that to you, and I don't think anybody else would too if you had somebody make an EMC connector onto a cable, or you did it yourself. But I personally like the EMC connectors more so than anything else. I think it's a very critical piece of of gear to have, or not really gear, but I think it's a very important piece of tech to have on a connector when it goes into a microphone. Now, I do not use the male EMC connectors at all. The reason I don't is because I don't want there to be any grounding to the case of the mixer interface or recorder that I'm plugging up my microphone to. I want to have the case of the microphone to be grounded and go through the drain or ground pin, pin 1 on an XLR, but I don't want anything else to potentially interfere with that. And if the same ground is tied on the male end, when you plug it in, if there's any sort of EMI or RFI on the that's being affected maybe from a bad other cable or an incorrectly connected a power cable or a short or something like that, I don't want to introduce anything that is from the interface mixer or recorder into the cable coming back up the way, which would be through the shield, through the shield casing of the male, and if it's connected up to the pin 1 ground, it could very easily go backwards through the line, and I don't want to run the risk of any of that happening. It's extremely rare. I've seen it only, I think, a couple of times in my entire career where something gets introduced backwards through it. But here's the thing. When I make a cable for someone, I don't know where it's going to go, what it's going to happen to. It could go into a spaghetti, a bunch of power cables all over the place. I don't know. And so I want to make sure that all the bases are covered so that way it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt anybody if they happen to plug it up to something like that and it's getting any EMI or RFI. So anyway, that's EMC connectors, a little bit about how they are built, how they're made, and what you need to do to break into them, or break into them. For the Pro Sound topic that I'm going to be discussing in this video is going to be, does pay equal difficulty of work on a film set? Well, no, it doesn't, let the truth be known. But then, when does it ever? I mean, there's a lot of people that will say that producers don't do anything. They just stand around. But here's the thing. Producers have to use their brains to get the money. They have to budget correctly. They sign off on a form, on a paper with the studio that says that they are going to be able to bring in a show and accomplish a certain number of episodes or produce the movie under or at a certain budget. And so there's a liability about that. They may come to set, sit around and maybe throw out ideas, say they want another one, something like that. But still, they're the money people. Same thing with executive producers. They may or may not be people that are shelling out money. Sometimes an executive producer account will come from someone that does some sort of a creative offer. Sometimes, well, a producer might also, like for example, the lead actor may take a huge cut in pay in order to get a producer credit. Somebody who's a writer, for example, they may take a producer or executive producer credit in order to get that credit. There's a whole lot of different liability, and that's really what it boils down to, is liability. If the job that you're doing is not as difficult as other jobs, even in your department, for example, then you may end up looking at that and saying, it's not fair. This person's making more for me and I'm working harder than them. Guess what? That's the nature of the beast. Many times people will end up doing something like working on the front lines in a fast food restaurant, and there's a manager that's just not having to deal necessarily with things constantly. They may be in an office, they may be in the back, counting things or something like that, or they might do hiring or something that seems like it's a very easy thing. The thing is, though, they've already put in their work in the front lines, they've got the experience, they've moved up into a higher position for whatever reason. They were picked for that particular role. On a film set, it's very similar. The entry-level job to a film industry, production sound person, is the sound utility. Now you may say, but the sound utility has to be a jack of all trades. They have to be able to mix and step in for a mixer. If they have to step out and make a phone call or go to the restroom or, whatever. And that's true. They also need to step in there and second boom. They also need to understand the paperwork and the wiring. You understand what goes into the sound utility role. And if you don't, and you have any interest in that, I do have a $50 kind of an overview 101 class that I do have available if you want to buy it. If you don't want to buy a class that's been presented, then what you can do is pick up Patricia Bierswa's book, and I do have a video about how effective that is for teaching utility sound technicians or USTs how to do their job. Now you may say then, well, what is it about the boom operator? The boom operator is the person that stands on set. They get paid more than the utility, but they don't have as much to do. Well, here's the thing. There may be downtime There's downtime in every single role there is on a film set, including in the sound department. So you may look at it and say the sound utility is go, 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 hustling all day long. The fact of the matter is, so is the boom operator if they're effective at doing their job well. They're going to be on set. Maybe there's a long lighting set up and they can sit down and look at the sides. Then they're studying the dialogue. They may look ahead at the schedule and try to get a feel of something. They may be reading a script. They may be getting ahead a little bit and trying to figure out what's going on. They may be talking to the camera operators. It may look like they're just chit-chatting with people. There's a whole lot of different aspects of what a boom operator does, and it's not necessarily something that would make sense to a utility. Quite often the downtime of a utility would be between takes, and usually between takes is when a boom operator might be listening to a conversation across the way, looking like they're zoned out or whatever. Now, if you were to watch the Atlanta Audio Engineering Society live stream in the year 2021, Glenn True did mention at one point, and Whit Norris, another production sound mixer, also agreed with him, that once the show starts, the mixer is not nearly as important as the boom operator is on a set. They're still very important, don't get me wrong. They still listen, they have to manage the department, but the actual person that kind of runs the show is the boom operator on the set, because they have to watch the rehearsal, determine what microphones need to be placed, unless there's a blanket policy of this always happens. Like, for example, if you always wire up all talent who speaks, that's a blanket policy and you always do that. If a blanket policy is to always have a plant microphone someplace nearby, so that way if there's a wide shot, it plays as a closer perspective than a boom would be, that's a blanket policy for the department that the sound mixer would put in place. And that's something that's just a given. Any boom operator would do that as part of that team. But if I'm booming a scene, I will go to set, I'll watch the rehearsal, I'll listen to how they're going to plan on covering that, what they're planning on doing, how they're planning on doing that, and I will also, being a filmmaker myself, think about the way that things are going to be covered and what they might be doing in order to accomplish something. If there's a part of the script that is highlighted in big letters, if there's something that seems like it's not normally this person looks over that direction or smiles or something like that. If there's more direction, like having a hard time finding something in a notebook, there may be an insert of that you have to be aware of, flipping through a page. If it's the such and such is looking out of a window, there's going to be a shot looking probably from the other side of the window in at the actor and looking over them out the window. There very well could be pieces like that too. So you have to be aware of that, and you have to think ahead as to what all you need to accomplish in this scene and what the director might. And so that's part of listening to the director, listening to the first AD and the DP, and kind of seeing where they're going with all this. Plus, if it's a long show and you understand the way that the show works, like on a long episodic TV show, then it will make more sense, as you know that they're only going to spend, do like very simple coverage. It's going to be a wide, punch in for coverage, over, and you're out. It may be that it's more creative and you have to do 6-7 different angles. It's going to be crazy. If there's one scene all day and that they schedule 12 to 14 hour days every day, don't expect to get out by lunch unless it's a unique location and you have a hard out and they've said, look guys, we're in a hustle, we have to get out because we're daylight dependent, we have to be at this other location first thing tomorrow morning, what have you. But a boom operator is usually paid more than a utility, even though that may not seem fair to some utilities. If a utility comes to set, they will usually re-rate if they pick up a boom and they boom a scene. In the world of union television and features, the way it works is to earn a re-rate. I don't care what people say. If you look at the actual contract, some people will say, well, they have to boom for 2 hours. Producers and UPMs will usually throw that one out there. But if you look at the wording, what it is that as soon as that utility was informed that they are going to be doing that position, they have 2 hours of that. And as long as they do that job at least one time, they're good. So if I tell my utility, you're going to be booming in this scene, so get the stuff ready, familiarizing yourself with the scene and whatever, I call them in. As soon as that utility picks up the boom for one take, they have earned that re-rate, provided they work at least 2 hours after I gave them the assignment of being a boom operator. I technically will re-rate them at that point. Now, a sound mixer will be sitting in the chair, usually allowing the utility to run on autopilot with regards to the maintaining the inventory and wiring up talent stuff. They'll expect them to kind of manage that, and they'll expect the boom operator to manage everything on the set in front of the camera, and manage the whole set with regards to what it takes to get the proper amount, the dialogue from the actors, any sounds and what have you. So the sound mixer, when it comes down to, and this is not my words, these are Glenn True and Whit Norris, let the truth be known, once prep is done and the mixer is sitting in the chair, most of their work is done by hiring a good team that will take good care of them and manage the set properly, manage behind the scenes properly, and of course, as always, represent the department and maintain the standards of the sound mixer. So the sound mixer usually will get paid a lot more money than the utility will, and the boom operator is usually somewhere in the middle of that. Now, this is mainly because the sound mixer, usually to become a sound mixer, you have to have years of experience in familiarizing yourself with all three of the jobs on a film set. It used to be that a sound mixer would have been a utility for maybe 10 years, then a boom operator for maybe 10 years, then gone into becoming a mixer once they've kind of saved up enough money to buy gear and acquired it. A lot of the digital era has been fast-tracked. There are people coming out of film schools, and a year later, they have they've built themselves up a kit, and they're doing sound mixing on reality TV shows, and then a couple of years after that, they're doing mixing on cart work and scripted television and features. And I personally wish that they would just slow down a little bit. I understand you may have an aptitude for mixing, and there have been prodigies in the past. I mean, I know quite a few mixers that have been mixing for over 40 years, and they were prodigies that just studied it hard, hit it hard, got lucky when they first got in and how they got in and with the opportunities they had, and they got very, very, very lucky, and they were very skilled and did a very good job from a very young age. That's rare, though. A lot of people are coming out of film school, and they will just fast track. They're like, I want to be a mixer. One of my favorite stories that I love telling is that there was a meet and greet type opportunity that we had a few years ago in Atlanta, maybe 10 years ago now. No, not quite that long. I was teaching a lot of classes at the time. And so people were introducing me to a lot of new people that were coming from film schools and wanted to be in the sound department. And I remember that there was somebody who introduced me to a young man and a young woman. And they were fresh out of film school, 22 years old. And I remember asking, I said, oh, great, welcome to Atlanta, and what do you want to do? And the young lady did not want to talk. The guy was more than happy to, dominate the conversation. And I said, what do you want to do? He says, I want to mix. I'm like, cool. So what do you want to do in the short term? He said, well, I want to mix. I mean, he says, I'm a pretty fast study man. I think I could probably get the hang of being a utility after 1 or 2 shows, and maybe 6 months later, be a boom operator, and I'll probably master that after about 6 months, and then I'll be ready to mix. And I'm like, really? You think you're that quick of a study? And what kind of stuff do you want to mix? And he's like, oh, well, I'm awesome. I mean, he didn't say that technically. I mean, but he basically started puffing himself up and was like, well, I think I can do this and this and this. And one of the things he said that was really funny is he said, I think it'd be really cool to kind of work on a transmitter, a Transformers movie, something like that. And I said, really? He said, yeah, I could boom a Transformers movie. And so that's the kind of thing I think I'd like to boom. And I kind of smiled because I know Kevin Cherokee Eye, the boom operator that did a lot of the Transformers movies, and at the time he was exclusively working, well, not exclusively, but he was working quite often with Peter Devlin, the very skilled, very talented, very experienced sound mixer that did the Transformers movies. And I said, really? Well, let me ask you something here. I would love to hear what you could tell me you would say and do to convince Peter Devlin to replace his boom operator, very, very skilled and experienced boom operator of well over a decade, with you, fresh out of film school, on that movie, on the next Transformers movie. I would love to hear what you have to say about that and what you plan on telling him, because I need to learn from you. And his eyes kind of got big, and he kind of looked at me and was like, I'm like, yeah, you don't understand what you're saying and what you're doing here. There's a whole lot that goes into things. I mean, into these things. There's part of being lucky. It's part of being extremely skilled. It's part of having a lot of experience and making the right connections, doing a solid job of being asked back, making more connections. I mean, there's a lot to it. And people that come straight out of film school, because they have a tech background and they learned how to use all the gear in film school, that does not mean you're ready to do the job of being a sound mixer and suddenly commanding the sound mixer's rates. There have been many times I have gone to work with people who are now a sound mixer that I trained. I trained them years ago, and some of them I had a little bit of input in their training. Some of them I train more exclusively, and then after a year or two, I see them going off and doing a show, and some of these mixers I've gone to day play for. And when I've gone to day play for, they have totally made some really weird decisions. And they'll say, yeah, we're going to do this and this. And I'm like, no, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And they're like, did they say that over the walkie? I'm like, no, they don't have to. I know what's going to happen. And then they end up saying, well, how did you know? I'm like, experience. You learn things over the course of time. They may deviate from it, but a lot of the times it'll be like a commercial is going to be this way. And a TV show will be this way. Low budget feature or a medium feature, a ASA contract feature that's tier 3 will be a certain way. And there are certain trends that you will see, and once you kind of familiarize yourself with the way the first AD manages the show and the director directs and the DP lights and covers things, you can kind of figure out a lot of things. But that's part of being a quick study, understanding where you're coming from on a film set and that kind of thing. So what I would advise many of the young people that are just getting out of film school, that have only been in utility for a year or maybe a couple of years being a boom operator or something like that, slow down a little bit. Sure, you may be able to get a loan or ask mommy and daddy or even work really hard and save up a lot of money and buy a bunch of gear, but does that really make you a sound mixer? Yes, you're able to sit in the chair and you're able to arm and disarm certain tracks, and you understand what the metadata needs to be. That doesn't mean that you're an effective sound mixer. There's a lot that goes into making a good mix. Even though that mix may only be used for the dailies, there's still a lot of politics that goes into being a mixer and that kind of thing. And that's where I'm going with all of this, that it may not be the most physical job on a film set or even in the production sound department, but there is a lot that goes into the behind the scenes politics. When you go out to do a tech scout, part of it is also reputation and connections you make with people that get you those jobs. So you may say, somebody should just do anything except sit in the chair and hit record. Well, if you're a good boom operator and you have a good utility, that's all they need to be doing. Now, personally, I would love to see there be a closer balance between the rates that are paid in the sound department. I think the sound mixer, the boom operator, and the sound utility need to be much closer than they are. I've worked on shows before where a mixer will get not just the package rental, which will be a few $100s per day, but they're going to get sometimes double what the utility is getting. And the utility is busting their tail, and the sound mixer is not paying attention half the day. And when they do pay attention, then they are completely like out of the loop and don't know what's going on. But then that's part of the luxury of being a mixer and getting to that level, I guess. And so but that's where I'm coming from. This is, I personally think that when it comes down to the jobs itself in the sound department, the most difficult job is indeed the sound utility, even though they have no power. Second would be the boom operator, even though it could be argued that that is equally as difficult because you have to run the set, make all the connections, you have to be on top of everything with the people on set, you have to make, establish yourself as being someone that will represent the sound department, and that means commanding a certain amount of respect from the get-go in a world where you are the only artist that is on set that is audio related. Everybody else cares about picture. You have to care about both audio and picture, and you have to establish yourself as a team player and still cover your tracks and cover your bases and make sure you do everything, because they're not thinking about sound. They expect sound to just work. But then there's the sound mixer, who, as long as their team does a good job, they've done their job and they've hired well, they've already done whatever they needed to experience-wise to get the show. Even if it's a mixer who's one of these new guys I was talking about that just got out of film school, they were able to get that show. It says something. Maybe they knew somebody or whatever. It happens. Unfortunately, Nepotism is something that happens a lot in the film industry. Having, family, friend connections that will help you get yourself fast-tracked up through departments does happen. Definitely happens in the sound department too. So if you want to talk about money, I think that the sound mixer, the sound utility, and boom operator should be all closer matched. And I don't think that mixers should be hoarding all the money for the department and then having their boom operators and sound utilities make collectively half of what they do. Not including the package rental, I think that's a totally separate thing. But personally, I've seen some mixers that will just be money hungry and they don't mind taking all the money out of the sound department budget and then hiring whoever they can that will hold the pole or wire people just because they're happy to line their pockets and deal with it that way. Personally, I think that's kind of a scumbaggy thing to do because your team works really hard and they're the ones that make you look good and sound good, rather, in the sound world. So anyway, there you have it. There is a little bit of tidbit of information from me and my thoughts and opinions on a few things, and not just mine. These have been focused and shaped by many professional sound people other than me. Other boom operators I've talked to that would love recognition. Other sound utilities that are even career sound utilities and been doing this for well over a decade. And like me, they have been hired by mixers who are straight out of film school and or maybe not straight out of film school, but finally saved up enough money to be able to mix something. And they've only been doing it a year or so and don't have much experience being a sound utility or boom operator, and suddenly they step on set, they get a job because of the connections they've made, but they hire a good team so that way they look good. That's part of it too, hiring a good team. And yet, even those mixers can sometimes be greedy, which I don't like. But then, I'm a career boom op, so it's kind of hard to change those trends. But if you're a sound mixer out there, please consider what I said. You're not the ones that are getting rotator cuff injuries, that have plantar fasciitis, and you're having to stand on set doing walk and talks over unstable ground, busting up your knees and throwing off your back and whatever else. You could say, well, that's the career path you chose. Sure. And I could very easily become a mixer as well. But still, I would respect my team. Just like first ADs that will do $5 Friday and they'll put money in the bucket and say, put set PAs on there. Or they will give very nice wrap gifts to the set PAs. When they go on location, we'll make sure the PAs are in very nice hotels, even though the crew may actually have a commute to another hotel. You know, things like that do happen. There are very good bosses. There are some that are scumbaggy. Personally, I'd rather work with the good ones. And I know a lot of very good mixers. So keep this in mind. And because that is not just my opinion. Those are kind of, I don't want to say common trends and thoughts that aren't normally spoken, but they are spoken. And watch that AES Atlanta live stream if you'd like a little bit of insight from a mixer perspective. So there you have it for episode 4 of the Speed Bumps podcast. Keeping in mind that a lot of the things that I mentioned in the previous segment pertain to different budgets of shows. If you work on the big budget shows, the big Hollywood shows that will take you all over the place, usually you will get a higher rate than you will when you work on the smaller budget shows, and then the department may end up having one budget, and whatever the sound mixer can get will get the lion's share of it, and then that leaves still the rest of the sound budget for the rest of the team. It doesn't always happen that way on all levels of production, especially on the big Hollywood shows. It's a little bit more lenient there with people. But regardless, I will stop talking now because you have been listening to me for quite a while. I mean, pretty much as soon as I left my location, and it is Friday. So I am nearly home now. Thank you for listening to this episode of Speed Bumps, and I will see you in the next episode where I will talk to you even more, answer more questions, and bring you, as always, more sound advice.
Okay, so I got like 24 seconds. If you would like to ask a sound-related question to be answered in a future episode, send text, audio, or video to ssp@soundspeeds.us. If you want to record this outro, there's details in the description below. You can also find Alan on social media and online at www.soundspeeds.us. And while you're here, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more sound-related content.